Welcome to this in-depth interview with BCVoice Sports. My name is Dean Barker. I'm the sports editor for BCVoice. The man I'm interviewing today needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. His name is Michael Clark. He's the head coach of Bridgewater College football. He's been a coach for 41 years, 26 with Bridgewater, and he's the defending ODAC champion. This is going to be his last year with Bridgewater, so we wanted to give him this interview. Coach, thanks for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a great run, and I've got to share it with a lot of interesting and great people. And I'll miss the people, but I do think there comes a time in situations in life where it really is somebody else's turn. And I'm thrilled that Scott Lem's going to get the opportunity to take this over. It's well deserved, and I do think a program that has been good, actually under some new leadership and energy, will have a chance to get better.
This past year has probably been the hardest year for a lot of people. So what has been the biggest challenge for you as a coach leading your team through a fall with no football and a lot of other stuff going on in the world?
Well, I think it's been there's no question in my 26 years as the head coach at Bridgewater, this has been the most challenging in terms of what we've had to deal with off the field, the uncertainty, and certainly I'm not as anal retentive as some coaches, but you get into routines, you get into structures, and to have all those broken down was difficult. And certainly the sacrifices that we've had to ask our players and certainly the student body in general here to make over the last year, it's been hard. I'm not sure, we might be on plan 5 right now for our players. And I can still remember, was it last March where we said, look, you're going to go home. We got to send you home for 3 weeks. And here's what we're going to do when you get back. And gosh, that was a long time ago, and a lot has changed. I do think the ability or the hope to get on the field and play, to me, is going to be very important. Particularly for the kids that have returned and invested. We understand, the way the circumstances are, we might not be as competitive as we'd like, but I think I look forward to getting us to a field to play. You put a ball down, you turn a scoreboard on, we're going to play to win. But by the same token, I think you got to look out for the big picture as much as you can, and certainly laying a foundation and a structure for when things do reboot. And I do think as a college and in our sports program and in football in specific, by August, we'll be back to normal, on that reboot. And, when that time comes, we need to have as many cards in the deck as we can.
You are the defending champions, and it would be a shame for something like this to set you off pace. Going off of that, how have you prepared for this season differently than you would have prepared for, say, any other year?
I mean, it's been hard. We haven't had camp. It's been endless off season, and you were a former athlete. You guys understand that. You go for the games, and it's been 15 months since we've played in a game, and off seasons are hard. The one thing about football, it's a game that what you have to do when you're not in season is not. It's not like basketball where you're playing pickup basketball or you're not playing travel baseball. The things that we have to ask football student athletes to do when they're not in season sometimes doesn't relate real well to Saturdays. And in a game that involves buzzes and jolts and rewards, I mean, we've all gotten that Saturday surge. That hasn't happened in a long time. And I think to try to keep the energy level up is important. I do think, hey, we were undefeated in 2020. I didn't have to play anybody to repeat that undefeated season from 2019. But I do think where we're at right now, I want to try to, for the kids that have sacrificed and the coaches and the people that have invested, I'm just looking forward to getting on the field and playing. That in itself is going to be a big win. If we can pull that off and have a secure, healthy group that can go down the first Friday in March to Randolph-Macon and put a ball on a tee and kick it. I mean, that's going to be a win in itself. What comes after that's bonus.
Yeah, Randolph-Macon's always been pretty much the toughest game of the year, so it's perfect that that's the way we're going to start this season off. You've been a coach for a long time. Not everybody who plays football or loves football ends up being a coach. Why did you, Michael Clark, decide to become a coach?
Well, I was around, my dad was a coach. I actually played for my father for a couple of years in high school. He's a Hall of Fame coach, a high school Hall of Fame coach in the state of Ohio, and won, I believe, 237 games in his career. So I grew up around it. I still remember my days as a young, when I was my grandson's age, sitting on the steps of school buses, driving to football games with my father's team and being on the sideline on those games. That being said, it was just something I wanted to do. I looked at one other thing when I was in high school or coming out of college, and I was an English literature major. And, I looked at like some officer candidate schools in the Navy. And because I didn't have science background, the only thing I could go into was supply. And that really didn't interest me in that phase. And, some good things happened in my career early. I was very fortunate. I got my first full-time job when I was 24. And at the time I thought, well, I'm just lucky. That happens to everybody. It doesn't. And I got around some good people early in my career. And I can look back and I haven't been cheated. Certainly my time in Division One, I was there before the money was monopoly money. So, I didn't become a millionaire, but gosh, for 26 years, I've walked to work, and in a small realm, I've been the boss, and there's something to be said for that.
Absolutely. Since you've been the coach, what has been the biggest surprise for you?
Not much surprises me anymore. I will tell you that. The longer you're in the business, I think, you develop street smarts. And I think the key thing is, I think in any profession, to survive, you have to be willing to change. You have to be willing to adapt. I tell people I'm a very different head coach now than I was in 2001 when we took that team to the national championship game. How I operate within the team is very different. The coaches that I have around me are very different. And so I think I will say this, I've seen a lot in my time. I think the key thing is that even some of the tough things in football or in life or in business or whatever, your marriage, whatever you choose to do, I mean, the key thing is you got to absorb those, learn from them, let them make you street smart, but don't let them make you bitter and jaded. And I think I've been able to do that. I look around now and, hey, there's young guys that are getting paid $400,000 to coach a tight end, and they have an assistant coach. And, to me, good for them. I really feel that way for them. And it's good. I'm comfortable in my own skin right now. And I'll be able to look back, and my mantra is that comes from the Rolling Stones. It says, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you just might find you get what you need.
You just get what you need.
In Bridgewater College, I got what I needed.
What did you most need out of Bridgewater College? Because I'm sure with all the success you've had, you've probably had offers to go to other schools. What did you need out of Bridgewater that you found that you couldn't find anywhere else, that you stayed here so long?
I mean, at the time when I made the move to Bridgewater back in 1995, it really was about stability. I'd had a daughter, my oldest daughter. I had to move her in April of her 6th and 7th grade year. They were forced moves because I had lost jobs, at the Division I level. So, that's a difficult time. And at the time, I remember I wanted to stay in coaching, and Megan, who was getting ready to go into the 8th grade, I wanted to be able to look her in the eye and say, look, I'm going to put you in a situation where I'm going to get you through high school. I'm coming here, and I tell you, I will be here for 5 years. At that time, it was Turner Ashby High School when I said, you will graduate from this high school. I needed that stability. And to be that, I needed to be a head coach. I needed to get some control that you don't have sometimes as an assistant, particularly at the Division I level. That was the primary motivation. I mean, candidly, a while back, I had a few opportunities to leave. They weren't better jobs than I had here. I think, my wife kept my ego in check a couple times when, there were times she protected me from myself. And really what happens, Dean, whether you like to admit it or not, there's a lot of labeling that goes on in college sports, whether you're a D3 guy, you're a football coach. And I think what happens, next thing you know, your professional structure, your contacts get leveled, in a certain group, and that's where you live, that's where you interact, and that's who you have contact with. And to be honest with you, you look around, there's a lot of Division III coaches that have had long extended careers, if you really look and study it, more so than at other places, for a couple of reasons. One, yeah, there's pressure to win, but they're not going to fire you after one bad year, which happens in Division I. They're going to give you a chance to fix it first. And two, for most of us, you got to a point where nobody was calling you, but that's all right.
That's one thing I've loved about being at the D3 school, which you wouldn't experience at a D1 school, is that everybody's pulling for you. I mean, everybody wants to win, but we're not in this high pressure situation where we're going to be button heads if we lose one game.
And I think that's true, but I think there's a misnomer out there. A lot of times Division III people will take that holier than thou attitude. That isn't the case. I mean, there's good kids in Division III, there's bad kids in Division III. There's good coaches, there's bad coaches. I mean, there's a cross section. The only difference being is that they might not be as big and as fast as some of the kids in the Division I level. And certainly haven't spent time in the Division I level, even though it was in a previous life. Not everybody's there as a mercenary. There's some great student athletes there. That are there for a broad base, blended experience. And so in that sense, there's a little bit of glass in everybody's house, but by the same token, the same rewards I got winning on Jobson Field, I got just as big a thrill in those games as I did in Lane Stadium. And candidly, the disappointments were just as bad. I think there's a lot of people at the Division I level, people that I knew in a previous life that say, well, you play in front of 4,000 or 5,000 people. At the end of the game, you just shake hands and nobody cares what the score was. And that's far from the truth. I have a tough time sleeping at Virginia Tech when I lost a game. I have a tough time sleeping at Bridgewater when I lose a game. So I think a lot of the pressure and a lot of the energy in the drive, it's internal and it's going to transcend the level you're playing at.
And as a coach, and a lot of people don't know this, you haven't just been a coach at Bridgewater, you've also been a teacher. You taught my golf class 2 years ago. So in addition to also being a father, you're not only here to help kids win football games, you want to teach them life lessons. What is the biggest lesson that you try to teach a kid when he comes in here as a freshman at Bridgewater, and then when he leaves, what do you want him to learn more than anything?
I would think that there's a couple of things. Certainly at the Division III level, it keeps you humble. I get to make head coaching decisions. I get to make Frank Beamer, Justin Fuente, Bronco Mendenhall decisions. We also, right before I did this Zoom, I'm down there with my defensive coordinator and my linebacker coach, and we're putting pants, knee pads, and belts in lockers. So I got to be an equipment man this morning too. So it keeps you humble. You got to wear a lot of hats. But what I think one of the biggest thrills when I announced about 5 weeks ago that I was going to step away after this spring, I probably got contact via email, Twitter, text, letter from over 200 of my former players. I would barrage, a huge number. And the interesting thing was none of those young men now, Dean, really talked about games, scoreboards, accolades. And certainly in our time here, we've won our share of games. We've gotten our share of accolades. I mean, we haven't gotten cheated on that realm. But really what they talked about was the relationships, how they took football things and how it's transferred to their professional lives, their married life, and outside of here. And to me, that's the biggest thing I try to tell these kids. For the finishers, for people that come and finish, you're getting engaged in something. You're going to be my age, and I give my age, but I'm old enough to retire. And it's still going to be impacting you. I'm still drawn on my experiences and things that I learned, at the University of Cincinnati as a college football player. And I played my last college football game in 1979. So that's what I'd like to say. That's what I've given them. I've given them more than a Saturday rush, and not that I've given them, they've earned. They've earned that. And that's when I get my biggest thrill, when I'm able to see former players using the lessons we taught them here in life.
You're always proud to see a player graduate, come in as a boy and leave as a man. You've had a lot of proud moments in your career. You've got an NCAA trophy in the background of this interview. What has been the proudest moment of your career, whether it be this championship, whether it be senior day? What is the proudest moment of Michael Clark's career?
I think it's really the things I'm most proud of are off the field things. One's a family issue. I mean, I have grown children that I would pick as friends. And if you're a parent and you ever get to that point, you'll know what a thrill that is. Probably the second issue is that, I have former players who now are my friends. And I think to be able, the one thing that it's given me in this 26 years, I haven't been a moving target. I mean, if people need me or I need them, we know where each other is at. And to me, that's my biggest thrill. Because I'll tell you, as an athlete, and you've competed, I mean, any former athlete, one of the great gifts is your mind gets very selective as you age when it comes to scoreboards. We're able to go back and cherry pick the ones we want to remember, and we can bury, the ones that buried us, at certain times. So, that's a neat ability, but I do think the value off the scoreboard is what's provided me the most satisfaction and the most peace with what we've been able to accomplish here over the last 26 years.
Going off of those things that you like to bury, looking back on your career, what is one thing you wish you would have done differently, or one thing you look back and say, I didn't do perfect there?
I'm trying to think. Personally, I think probably early on in my career, I don't totally regret it. I mean, I was kind of a hot name professionally at the Division I level when I was in my early 30s, and I probably didn't do a real good job marketing myself at the time, when I could have. But that at the time I had young children, and as I remember one time this company wanted to hire me and fly me around on Saturdays to speak at clinics, and it would have been great exposure. And at the time I said no. There was money involved in it, but I thought I'm not giving up my Saturdays. That's when I hang out with my children, so my free time. So I guess I don't totally regret that. I think the one thing that makes it hard sometimes, as a coach, because there's a business component to what I do, and it bothers me that, there's been times I've had to hurt people that I like, whether that be assistant coaches, when I really felt it was in the best interest of the program for staff changes. Whether times I had to sit down with players and say, I'm going to make a choice that, you're not going to be my Saturday performer. And I'm well aware. I've been on both sides of that table. Before I got to Bridgewater,
Right.
I mean, I was asked to leave 2 jobs, and when I know I've hurt people, even though in the back of my mind, I said, I have to do this because my ultimate loyalty goes to the program. That is never easy. That is never
Right.
easy. And I know there's kids that I recruited with the best intentions that when I got here, had to tell them I can't play you on Saturday. And I realize I stuck the pin in some dreams right there but there's no perfect job. And my hope is that, that there's beauty in the experience. Okay. Even if you're not the one that the fans are cheering for on Saturday.
Right. Sometimes your job's the best job in the world. Sometimes it's the absolute hardest. You're coming off of probably one of the best seasons in Bridgewater history, an undefeated regular season and an ODAC championship. Looking forward to this season, what is your biggest goal, and how do you expect to keep the energy going so that you can defend your title?
Well, I think my biggest goal is to get to the field and play. I mean, to get people to the field and play. Understanding, there's a couple of key positions. If we were playing a game tomorrow, I'm not going to tell you there's 2 positions I don't have any backups at. We'd have to go out in the field and play with our fingers crossed, or make a player change mid-game. But in that thing, I think if I've learned anything over the last month, in the COVID seasons, we're in the second one right now, is that you better take day to day. And if you get too far ahead of yourself, you're getting ready to get your legs cut off. And so, in terms of, records and percentages, I'm not into that. As I mentioned earlier, Dean, it's like getting a team on the field that will have some fun competing against Randolph-Macon the first Friday in March. That is my focus right now. And that in itself will be a victory. Anything that happens after that ball's kicked off is bonus.
This is going to be the final season of a historic career for Coach Michael Clark. Why are you hanging it up after this year? What are you looking forward to this season as your last year? And what are you looking forward to most in retirement?
Well, I thought, two things. I debated. I knew I wanted to do one more year, and then I debated whether I'd come back and do it all next fall when we get a full season in. I really think it's in the best interest of the program to let next fall put the program on a front end of a 1-1. Let it be about Scott Lem's initial statement rather than my swan song. I really thought that energy would be important for the program. Um, I haven't overanalyzed it. My dad always gave me good advice. He said, make sure you leave parties when they're sorry to see you go. And I think I was able to do that. When it gets to this, I think at some point you're too young to understand this, Dean, but sometimes you'll get to a point in your life where it's like, it's somebody else's turn. I think there are fights out there that belong to the next generation, and I'm more than comfortable in passing them off to them. I think we all see, there's no perfect time. It varies from individual to individual, and I think for me, it wasn't a spur of the moment decision, so in that sense, I'm going to fly fish. I'm going to try to win a senior golf tournament, and then I got to go out there and try to find a cause that needs my help.
You certainly found a cause that needed your help at Bridgewater. Coach Michael Clark, football coach, teacher, family man, mentor to a lot of people. Coach, thank you for spending time with us at BC Voice. We all want to wish you best of luck this season, and more than anything, we hope you have a happy retirement.
Well, I'll tell you what, always an eagle. You got to remember that's our sign, and that is not going to change. Okay, that is not going to change. So, and what I'll do, I'm going to keep a low profile once my time comes to move. But the people in this program, in this building, and on these fields and on these courts, they're not going to have a bigger fan. All right, thanks, Dean.
Absolutely. Take care, Coach.
Bye.